Okay, hopefully everybody sees that. All right, we want to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. And I'll share the details in a second, but want to recognize that, boy, we're just topping out 100 attendees tonight. And I really want to thank everybody for their interest and excitement. Maybe before we get started, when we see Dr. Shu Chen's name on our attendee list, we want to give a shout out to Dr. Chen. Many of us are on the panel tonight, owe a lot of our careers to you, and have learned a lot from you over the years about networking and kind of doing improving our careers. So we want to give a shout out to our mentor. Let me see if I can share some slides here, and bear with me while I get this looking good. I've got a little bit of an issue with the way my computer is handling slides tonight. Okay, I hope that looks all right for everybody. And I'll try to hide all of these fancy meeting controls so that everybody can kind of see my screen better. There we go. So welcome to our University of California Bioengineering Career Development and Industry panel. We had a fabulous panel about 6 months ago, sponsored by the California Academy of Bioengineering, and was specifically aimed at undergraduate and master's level students. And it really showed us that we needed to have yet another panel to talk through the entry, kind of the unique things that are different about seeking out career pathways as a postdoc or as a PhD student. So we are very excited tonight to present our panel, and I'm going to let panelists introduce themselves in just a second. But maybe before we do that, I'd like maybe Dr. Song Lee and Scott Simon to introduce themselves. And Dr. Simon, if you'd introduce the Academy, that would be wonderful too. Maybe you can get started.
Yeah, so thanks for organizing this. A big thanks to Walt and Linda, who have undertaken the industry liaison committee for the Bioengineering Institute of California. Many of you know the BIC is an MRU, that is a multi-campus research unit. I just handed over the reins to Song Lee, who's going to be the director for the next 3 years. During my time as director, we instituted what's called the California Academy of Bioengineering, which is around 50 or so National Academy members that work in the area of bioengineering. Pretty diverse group. They're both in industry and in academics, and not only in the UCs, but also at Stanford and Caltech, USC, et cetera. And so this is a forum, this distinguished lecture series is a forum for exactly this. That is, it's both to listen to scientists talk about their science and about future areas in which bioengineering is really taking a foothold, but also to provide a means by which folks that have already sort of made their careers can then, give a hand up and give some information to those trainees who are now trying to start their careers. And so simply said, this is just sort of one of the products that the Bioengineering Institute has put on. And Shu Chen started this, and now I'm handing it over to Song. So Song, I'll hand it over to you now.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, for the great introduction. And also I want to thank Walt, Linda, for organizing this wonderful webinar. And Walt and Linda co-chair the Industry Liaison Committee of the Bioengineering Institute of California. And as Walt just mentioned, we had a webinar a few months ago on the industry career development, and this is a second one. So really look forward to it. I want to thank all the panelists, the leaders in industry and academia, institutions. Here, I think Walt will give the introduction. Thank you, and look forward to it.
Thanks, Song and Scott. We really appreciate it. And I apologize for not elevating Linda Narhi. She's third in line here. She's the co-chair of the Industry Liaison Committee. Should have used a bigger font, but also serving as a panelist today. And I think without further ado, I'll let the panelists introduce themselves. I've kind of asked them to put together kind of a all about me slide. And so we'll move through those. We've got a couple of panelists that unfortunately couldn't make it, but I'm still going to share their all about me slide just so you can maybe reach out to them offline if something strikes you that you have in common with some of our panelists. And let me see if I can get the slide to advance. There we go. Linda, take it away.
All right. Thank you. And thanks, guys, for all the kind words. I will say at this point, Walt's done most of the heavy lifting for the ILC. And I'm just going to tell you all, I'm in Ventura County, which is being hit by the peak of the storm right now, including a little bit of lightning. So I apologize ahead of time if I'm breaking up or if I disappear, it means our power went off. So fingers crossed that doesn't happen. So this is actually a format that I used when I was consulting with Genentech for panel discussions, and I liked it, so I kept it. And they suggested that you kind of start out with what was a pivotal thing for getting you on the road to having a science career. And so I'm starting on the left here. For me, it was actually when my family moved from a very small rural town, it was almost an exaggeration for how big it was, in southwestern Michigan to Ann Arbor, where University of Michigan is. And so that's a picture of me. What you can't tell from the picture is when I was a kid, I had bright orange clown hair. So which had its own challenges, but anyway, and that was a revelation to me because we moved in the middle of first grade and all of a sudden we had science in the classroom, and my propensity to drive people crazy asking questions wasn't treated like it was a negative. The bad thing about that actually is that we moved in the middle of first grade and I missed about a year of math. And so it was actually not until I was in third grade when I learned to add and subtract, believe it or not, because I had a really good teacher who figured out that that was my issue. So I also want to mention that just in that, you know, you never know what you don't know. And luckily for me, my third grade teacher figured out what was going on, and that allowed me really to have the career that I've had, frankly. So I really like the science stuff, but I have a lot of other interests too. When I was in high school, besides taking science, and at that point, I was usually both the only redhead and the only girl, or one of two girls in the classroom. So I kind of learned that you can't hide. And I think that was actually a good thing. But I also was on Theater Guild. I did the literary magazine. I did a lot of eclectic things, had a very fun high school career with a lot of eclectic friends. Then I went to Michigan, and I got my BS in chemistry in the honors chem program, and also cell and molecular biology. And being kind of young and crazy, the same week that I graduated from Michigan, I also got married, and my husband and I drove to California for our honeymoon because Don was at Caltech at that point. And my honors thesis work was on an enzyme. And that's kind of when I realized that I really loved proteins, especially protein structure function. I thought I was going to hate California, so I told Don he could finish grad school and I would go someplace else, but that was December. And so by the time you had to apply for graduate school in February, I only applied to California schools, a couple of the UCs. And went to UCLA for both my PhD and then later for postdocing. And I was lucky enough at the time I was there, again, very few women, but the other thing was that it was the beginning of kind of the molecular biology revolution. So there were also very few people who worked on proteins. I think at the time I graduated, there were maybe 3 graduate students at all of UCLA that were doing proteins rather than molecular biology, which turned out to be a good thing for me because Amgen was looking for someone who could do protein purification and characterization. And so after I finished my postdoc, I started at Amgen in '86. The company was really small then. We still didn't have a product, so it was a startup. The logo at the bottom here is the original logo, which they took away because it was infringing on somebody's copyright, and then whoever had it disappeared, and so now it can get used again sometimes. So one of the nice things with an industry career that maybe is a little bit different than if you stay in academia is that you don't necessarily stay doing what you started. And so that was definitely true for me. I started doing purification and a lot of characterization, which is what I really liked. I ended up leading the biophysics group, starting the particle group, being on the team that figured out how to do candidate selection, a whole bunch of different interesting things. And one of the things that a lot of, especially companies that started as biotech have, is kind of a bifurcated career pathway, where at some point you can kind of go management or you can stay on the science path. And I think at one point I had about 50 people in a group, but realized my passion is more around the science and the scientific strategy and external engagement in that space. And so I stayed on the scientific career path. And so in 2011, then I became a scientific executive director, which is, if you choose to go on the science path, you usually aren't going to end up being a vice president or like the very highest level, but it was really fun. I have a little family thing there because during this time I had 2 children. My husband's a physicist and I'm a biochemist. Neither one of our kids are physical scientists. And as the scientific director, I got to lead the internal and external technology development for process development. I've been in almost every department, quality, R&D where I started, and then process development for much of my career. And process development is really the one that picks the final candidate and does all the scale up of analytics, of purification, so that and supports things up into clinical trials. Different companies are organized differently, but the equivalent of PD, that bridge group, is there for all of them. And one of the really nice things I got to do was lead our academic outreach program and start and lead the postdoc program for Amgen. So if you kind of have questions around how that works, I'd be happy to answer that. As part of that, I got involved with the USP, the US Pharmacopoeia, and I'm still currently on several of their expert committees, and I lead the subvisible particle panel and the IQ, which is an industry consortium. I really like when across industry we work together to further issues where we all have things in common. I retired to do consulting with Denali, with Genentech. I'm just joined another consulting firm. I'm still on the USP stuff and still doing some IQ things. And then kind of a fun new career path is being an adjunct professor at UC Santa Barbara. And this fall I taught a lab class for the 3rd time, which is a really fun thing to do too. And so that's kind of my career.
Thank you, Linda. That was fantastic. People who are excited about careers in pharma, you know, we've got a lot of great experts here today, but Linda can definitely tell you the whole story. So thank you. Next up, we've got Don, who unfortunately is on a plane right now. He had some travel hiccups last night and sent his apologies to me earlier today by phone. But I'm going to pause here for just a second, just for anyone in the audience to have a look at Don's path, training at UC Davis and USC, and then a circuitous route to Medtronic's medical device manufacturing operations group. And like Linda, Don also is serving as an adjunct occasional instructor at UC Davis. So he's just really embraced the academic kind of industry divide there and really worked on both sides of that. So we're super lucky to have Don involved with the panel. Sorry he's not here tonight, but I can tell you that he's incredibly responsive, especially for students. So if anybody would like to connect with Don Chigazola, just give me a shout. And if you have questions about MedTech in particular, my name's Walt Baxter, and I'm here from Medtronic as well. So we can always talk through some of that tonight. Next up, Greg, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Greg Foster. I'm currently a senior manager in the genetic sciences business at Thermo Fisher Scientific. And I'm sure most of you have heard of that company since you were all bioengineers and work in a lab. My journey towards becoming a biomedical engineer started when I was very young. My parents gave me my first Lego set when I was, I don't know, a year or two there. And I was hooked. I just loved building and interacting with things. In high school, I joined the engineering program they had there to do. Originally, it's just drafting, so you know, pen and pencil on a board, and then eventually we moved into using Autodesk and AutoCAD on a computer. And then I went to UC Davis for biomedical engineering for my undergraduate degree and enjoyed my time there so much that I stayed to do my PhD in Professor Scott Simon's lab. And it was there that I became even more attracted to the field of science and academic science, and you know, wanted to become a professor. And then I left to go do a postdoc at Georgia Tech, where I use my knowledge in Scott Simon's lab of using microfluidics as a tool for, in this case, for doing biomaterial drug delivery to mice treated that have type 1 diabetes. And then, my wife and I was like, being a postdoc is wonderful, but, is there any other things you want to do just in case this academic thing doesn't work out for you? And I was like, I really like building things. Maybe I should give industry a shot. And so I joined Thermo Fisher Scientific in 2017 as a staff engineer. And this was the first product that I launched. You can see there, it's called the Accelerome. The problem we were trying to solve was that sample prep for mass spec based proteomics right now is done very manual, and it's laborious and prone to a lot of errors. And it's a 24 or 48 hour process. And so we wanted to automate that in some turnkey, easy to use little box. And so this was the solution, a little liquid handler that can do the proteomic sample prep, starting from a cell lysate or whole proteins down to clean labeled peptides that are ready to be injected into the mass spectrometer. And then in 2020, I moved from working on systems around proteins to working on genetic analysis systems. And so pictured there on the bottom right is a recent product that I just launched called the Seq Studio Flex. And this is a capillary electrophoresis system. And capillary electrophoresis, for those of you who don't know, it was the original technology that was used to sequence the whole human genome before there was any discussion of NGS. So this was the first generation sequencing technology. And even before then, it was done on slab gels. So the ability to do it in capillaries was quite revolutionary at the time. And it's still going strong now. It's the technology that's used for doing any kind of human identification for forensic analysis. And so if you ever read any kind of study where, someone was caught based on some DNA evidence, there's the 99% chance that it was done on a capillary electrophoresis system, and we own about 99% of that market. So it was probably done on one of these boxes, which is really, really cool. Besides being a biomedical engineer and getting my Ph.D. in Scott's lab, it was also in his lab that I met my now wife, and now we have 3 wonderful dogs that keep us really busy. And my even though my title at Thermo Fisher Scientific is senior manager R&D systems integration, my real title is biomedical engineer, and the company really appreciates that and enjoys that because of the value that biomedical engineers bring to industry. So if you have any questions about moving towards industry, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or connect, or if you're interested in any internships or postdoc programs that we have there. That's something we've recently started, is the industry postdoc program.
Thanks, Greg. That's perfect. I forgot to remind everyone in the audience that if you've got questions, in case you've been jotting them down, feel free to throw those into the chat. Once we're done with introductions, I'll just kind of go in order and start asking that way. If you'd like to be unmuted and just talk through a question, that's great too. Just let me know. All right. Our next panelist is Anne. So please take it away.
Thank you, Walt. Hi, everyone. I'm Anne Lee Carlin. I am Chief Operating Officer at Altos Labs, and I'd love to give you the briefest tour. I use this world map, I guess only in the Northern Hemisphere, but to take you through my tour from the beginnings to Altos. I was born in New Orleans. I don't know if you can tell from my accent. I have almost as good of an accent as Walt. And I grew up there for 13 years. And my dad was an engineering professor there, and my mom was a math major by training. So in our house, I'd like to call it the House of Science, which meant that I really loved science and really thinking about what the future could be. When I was 13, we moved to San Luis Obispo, California. And I spent the rest of my time there. And I grew to love this idea of, creating a path forward, as a lot of people have described here, of some kind of integrated approach with biology and technology. I also read a lot of science fiction and clearly watched way too many, I guess, TV and movies too. So there's a lot of science fiction that kind of helped influence where I wanted to go. And Blade Runner, I know I'm probably dating myself, but Blade Runner is probably what made me pick my major. very thoughtfully. And I became a bioengineering major at UC Berkeley. This is actually before they even had a department there. So we were sort of 12 of us who wanted to create our own major, ended up together. And if I fast forward a bit, loved my training there at Berkeley. One of my highlights in the summers was I was an engineering intern at NASA, JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab, and I got to meet Carl Sagan, big fan. And another highlight is after I finished at Berkeley, I was able to do a internship over in University of Geneva in medical imaging. I'm a proud alum of UC San Diego Bioengineering, and very grateful to Dr. Shu Chen, Dr. Andrew McCulloch, and I'm sure others out there as well. I've learned from so many people. And while it seems kind of belated, it was the first time I actually got introduced to molecular biology properly, and never kind of looked back. So this idea of really delving into the molecular approach in engineering was just so eye-opening and just really invigorating. After I finished my PhD at UCSD, I did a postdoc in London, and was very interested. I think as an engineer, always wanted to do something that was product development focused and really, had a tangible impact for patients, made a difference in people's lives. So I moved fairly quickly after my postdoc into biotech. I joined Advanced Tissue Sciences that was based in La Jolla and ventured into the early one of many cycles of tissue engineering. I'm sure that is out there, but tissue regeneration, tissue engineering has always captivated me. And again, was very grateful to work with a number of UCSD faculty leaders and colleagues as well as they ventured forth. It was when I was this sort of first industry experience is when I first worked on sort of an interdisciplinary team. I really learned about science, the engineering, but also a bit of strategy, understanding how people make decisions, how people start building companies. And I was so fascinated that I decided to take an orthogonal left turn and went to business school, went to Stanford to get my MBA, another graduate school. That was a great experience and opened many doors and many possibilities. The one path I took forward from there was that I joined Eli Lilly's venture group very briefly to help figure out ways to accelerate early development. And was there for just about 2 years and had an opportunity then to join Genentech, which is a wonderful company. And I was at Genentech for over 18 years. Played many different roles there, primarily on the product development teams, from research all the way to launching a product, and became head of portfolio management operations in our research and early development group. And I'd say over 18 years, helped to shepherd, so many people involved, helped to shepherd probably over 80 teams there in drug development across all therapeutic areas. My highlights there is that I was a team leader for Rituxan and Ocrevus, which are anti-CD20 antibody approaches, and especially in the areas of autoimmune disease. So for rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and launched successfully into multiple sclerosis. And in many ways, kind of rewrote that therapy really rewrote how multiple sclerosis is treated. So extremely gratifying to be a small part of a very big effort. Back in, let's see, wow, are we in 2023? Oh boy, in 20, Happy New Year. In 2021, I received a call to ask if I was interested in this incredibly interesting new venture, which became Altos Labs, which is where I am now. So in June of 2021, I joined Altos as employee number 2. And over 18 months, we have built 3 global sites and have welcomed over 400 people into our new venture. It has been a bit of a rocket ship. And the best way I can describe it is really there's a deep commitment at Altos to delve into the areas of restoring cell health and to reprogram cells. And it's based a lot on the inspiration and work of Shinya Yamanaka, who won the Nobel Prize in 2012 for showing that you can dial cells back to their original state. So there's a number of different paths and areas. And I'll end with Altos is a really wonderful, grand, I would say probably an ambitious experiment of blending academia and industry. We have recruited and successfully welcomed over 26 tenured professors into our 3 global sites and invited them to bring their entire labs over, which is probably the only way you can really get from 0 to 400 plus people. And we're excited to, help contribute to an area in which, if we're successful together with many other people, I'm sure outside of our company, there might be a chance to help reverse disease. So I will stop there and happy to participate on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And next up, we have Kevin Francis. Kevin, please take it away.
That's a pretty hard path to follow after Anne. That's a pretty stellar career there. So yeah, I'm very fortunate in the fact that I knew I wanted to be a molecular biologist very early on in my my life. At the age of 16, I wanted to join the Royal Marines and fly off different places around the world, but they basically told me I was too dumb to join the Royal Marines, which is a real insult if you think about it. So anyway, I ended up going to, pursuing an academic career. And then halfway through my academic career, I thought, nah, I probably don't want to go into the Royal Marines anymore. So I started off, did my undergraduate degree at Plymouth and realized very quickly that I love molecular biology, but especially microbiology, because I'm a bit of a wuss and I didn't like playing with animals. So I was working mostly on bacteria at that stage. And then after I graduated, I ended up joining a company very close to where my mum was living in Purbright in Surrey. And they happened to work on foot and mouth disease virus in a BSL-3 facility. And there was an opening. And so I joined what was then Wellcome before GlaxoSmithKline acquired the company. And so I worked for a couple of years, actually 3 years, worked there. And during that time, I was very fortunate that I wanted to do a PhD, but they said they would sponsor me to do a master's degree first. So I went to Birkbeck College, University of London, and did my master's degree. And then when I finished my master's, they sponsored me to go to Surrey University to do a PhD. But then I realized it was just too much work. It was going to be a really long slog to try and get a PhD working for a company. So and also my job entailed, to test foot and mouth disease virus, you have to test it in a lot of cloven-hoof animals. And so at least every couple of weeks, we had to test these vaccines extensively. And that meant me sanctioning a lot of animals being killed. And I was trying to back away from that. So I ended up going to full-time to University of Edinburgh to do my PhD. And that's when I started working on bioluminescence. And that's really been my career since the late 80s, early 90s, have been working with bioluminescence and optical reporters. And I love this technology. Initially, when optical imaging was being done with bioluminescence, nobody had any of these fancy cameras that were later developed. And so I used to just sit in dark rooms for hours on end, looking at little colonies and seeing which ones lit up, looking at salmonella. And I continued doing this when I was at a postdoc at University of Nottingham. And then finally, I decided that I wanted to try and get into industry. So my brother-in-law happens to be the chief scientific officer for a company called Fonterra in New Zealand. And they had an opening at that stage for somebody to run the microbiology department in New Zealand. So my wife wanted to move to New Zealand. So I, believe it or not, I went to Technical University of Munich because that was one of the major dairy research institutes that Fonterra worked with. So I ended up getting this novel position as an assistant professor at the Technical University of Munich, so I could use it as a stepping stone to go to New Zealand. But while I was there, I saw this advert in Science, and it was for somebody who had done biophotonic imaging, which I had no clue what that meant. But I sort of thought that may be something to do with what I'm doing. And they wanted somebody that had engineered gram-positive bacteria. So I faxed off, this was back in the 90s, mid 90s. So I faxed off my my CV to the CEO of this new company, which is based in California called Xenogen. And the very next day they flew out to London and paid for my ticket to fly from Munich to London and met me there and just offered me the job on the spot. So then I moved to California in 98, 99 and started my career at Xenogen, heading up the R&D. And then we were acquired by a company called Caliper several years later. And then that company was acquired by PerkinElmer about 10 years ago. And so I've had the same career in a company for the past 25 years. It's got different names, but it's essentially the same job that I've done. I've bounced back and forth. R&D, biology R&D is where my heart is. I love doing research, but unfortunately it doesn't pay that well. And so I've had to associate myself with the sales organization, with the business organization. And by doing that, it's allowed me to elevate my career. And at the same time, the company's been very kind to me. They've allowed me to have visiting and adjunct professorships. And so I've been very fortunate in my career. I've loved my job. I really love getting up every day and doing my work because I basically can do what I want to do, because what I do is very, beneficial to the company. But the other nice thing they've allowed me to do is have these professorships, visiting and adjunct professorships, which allow me then to get rid of my frustrations by doing research outside of industry. And I've, not to brag, but I'm in a company, I've been able to publish more than 100 publications over that period of time, which is, and it's great fun. And in addition to that, I've flown more than 4 million miles around the world. I've visited virtually every country on the planet. I've been to all 50 states many, many times. I travel back and forth to Europe every couple of months or to Asia. So I've virtually been everywhere. So much to my wife's disgust, actually. She's always saying, I've never been to Japan. I've never been to Singapore. I've never been to, when are you going to take me? So she's just retired. So now I can take her, which would be wonderful. So anyway, that's basically my career in a nutshell. And one other thing, because I interact so much with academia, our instrumentation, biophotonic imaging, has been sold to virtually every major pharmaceutical, biotech, and academic in the world. I have a lot of connections. So one of the things, and this is not a sort of like lame thing to say, I could help introduce you to different groups. At the moment, to that point, I've been working with UCLA. I'm an adjunct professor at UCLA in the orthopedic department. The manager there, the lab manager there, was working with one of my colleagues who has now offered her a job. So she's joining PerkinElmer. So at the moment, we're looking for a lab manager at UCLA. So if any of you guys have got any experience with doing animal modeling, then let me know, because we're looking for somebody to become lab manager at UCLA. It's not an industry, but it's a good position, a nice stepping stone.
Thank you, Kevin. You hit all the points there, and I hope this right side of this slide reinforces to everybody that's on the meeting tonight how fulfilling kind of this kind of industry and academia sort of back and forth can be. So thanks for sharing, Kevin. So speaking of productivity, we should let everybody know, we should let everybody know that our second panelist that unfortunately isn't with us tonight is not here for a happy occasion. She's having her, she has conveniently over here her second child, baby on the way any day now. It turns out that day is today, January 9th. So congratulations to Dr. Christine King. I'll leave this slide up on the screen for just a second. She's serving as a assistant professor of teaching at UC Irvine, has been in that role since 2018, and again has this incredibly interesting and twisty path to her role right now, where she really enjoys working with students. So if you are excited about the teaching side of your PhD journey, Christine would be a fantastic person to talk to, and she's just absolutely happy to help any UC student anytime. So let me know if you'd like for me to connect you with Christine King. All right, and I think maybe our last panelist, Steve, can take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Walt. I can go pretty quickly. I know in the interest of time, for sure. I think this is just a series of arrows kind of showing where my training path is, and Walt's going to animate. I grew up in Oregon, went to school at Northwestern and majored in chemical engineering and joined a lab there, like a lot of us do, to get interested in science. And that's what first piqued my interest in even possibly getting a PhD. But I met my wife there, and she was going to med school, so we went to med school. She's from St. Louis, so we went to the University of Missouri. And after a couple of years in med school, the science was great, but I decided I really wanted to go back and do science. So I went to Seattle, and I got a PhD in chemical engineering there, with the plan of always pursuing an academic career. So I got an offer, and we jumped at the opportunity to go to UC Irvine in Southern California, and we raised our family there. I was there for 19 years. Started the department of biomedical engineering there, lots of great experiences. And then I had an opportunity to be the chair at WashU in St. Louis. We went back, kind of touched base with my in-laws back there. That was actually a great experience for me, but not so great for my wife professionally. So we decided we wanted to come back to California, got an offer to come back, and now I'm at UC Davis. I've been here for about 5.5 years. Didn't originally come to be the chair, thought that was sort of behind me, but the opportunity presented itself shortly after I got here. So I've been the chair for about 4 years now. I've trained, I think, 31 PhD students in my lab and 20 postdocs, and I think that's probably what I bring to the panel. I've seen both private and public universities, and the trainees in my lab have gone on to all kinds of different career paths, so I'm happy to sort of draw on that experience. So let me just end there, Walt.
Thank you, Steve. And wow, that was quite a journey as well. So appreciate you walking us through that. Again, we've got a really esteemed set of panelists. I'll just remind everybody that maybe what we can do now is I'll have a look at the chat. Well, it looks like we've got about 5 questions and answers here, but it doesn't matter where you put a question. Just go ahead and do that. And maybe I can serve as moderator here to get us started. Let's see, we've got our first question from, I'm probably going to mispronounce names. I apologize. It looks like Yu Young. How would the path differ after doing an industry postdoc rather than having a job in industry? So I'll just pause for a second and see if there's a panelist that would like to raise their hand and take that one. I know you could do that, Linda. You kind of are a postdoc expert through your time at Amgen. You want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take the beginning, and then probably people can add to it. So for a lot of the industrial postdocs, each program is structured a little bit differently. So when you're interviewing for those, make sure you check. For some of them, you can't be hired by that company immediately after you finish. Others actually encourage it. The Amgen program, actually, we did have a requirement that if you were postdocing, you had to postdoc for 2 years, because everyone ended up liking the quality of the postdoc so much they would want to hire them before they'd finished their research. And of course, the project they got put on was a research project that the company actually needed to have done. So if you start as a postdoc, you'll be paid more than an academic postdoc, but less than a regular scientist. It does give you space in that, as the postdoc, you're not going to get sucked into project work. And so you're going to actually be able to finish that research project that you're working on. And it's a really good opportunity to see if you like industry. When I was doing the program, it was half in process development, and then there was also an R&D postdocs as well. We did have 2 people who decided they wanted to go back to academia, and that was fine. Actually, the industry experience, I think, helped them as they built their careers, because they could do collaborations with industry then easier. They knew what types of things people wanted, and they had made those connections. But it's also kind of a good opportunity for the company to see if they like you or not. Once you get hired, typically what happens is you'll get promoted pretty much quicker. So after a couple of years, you'll be at the same level that you would have been if you'd started and didn't do a postdoc, if you'd started as a PhD, a scientist. I'm trying to think if there's any other differences. And I think the mention of publication when you're in industry, a lot of people don't realize that happens, but absolutely, especially if you like writing, one of the ways to protect intellectual property, actually, if you're not going to file a patent for it, is even to publish. So we have a lot of reasons for publishing as well. But I think that's kind of, the main difference. I think it depends on if you aren't sure which path you want to take, and if you'd like to have some time to continue kind of learning before you get sucked into project deliverables, which is what happens as soon as you're hired as a PhD level scientist in most companies.
Thanks, Linda. Really appreciate that. Hopefully that answered the question well enough. Just let us know if you need more detail, and we'll keep going with that one. We have an anonymous attendee who asks, can you kindly enable closed captioning? I'm very sorry, I didn't see that before now. Song, can you do that? Do you know how to turn on closed captioning? I don't on this particular Zoom interface. So I apologize, we're working on that here. Looks like it has to be enabled. Speaking of an anonymous question, we have any advice on how to navigate career opportunities during a current economic environment where some companies are laying off employees? I was going to ask maybe Greg to take that one if you don't mind. Not because you, not because your company may be laying off, but just rather to maybe give some advice for a different economic situation.
Yeah, the layoffs are happening, right, in a lot of companies. January tends to be the biggest month for layoffs. The way I would say to approach, like, if you're coming into industry fresh and new, the biggest weakness you have is you probably have a limited network compared to people who have already been in industry. Like, for people that were let go of at Thermo Fisher Scientific, I helped them find other jobs. One got a job at Agilent, another one got a job at Twist Biosciences. So that's going to be a bit of a gap, but it doesn't mean you don't have a network at all. You have this network to help, and it's the same story. It's like you have to use your network to get into those positions and find those positions. In terms of setting yourself apart from other candidates, what's been one of the most overlooked questions in interviews is at the end of the interview, I'll usually ask, so, what do you do for fun? What do you like doing? And what we're really prodding for, what we want to look for, is people that like to have this mantra of like continuous self-learning. And you don't just have to do that at work. You need to do that in your life. You have to have hobbies and things that encourage you to want to just continue to grow your knowledge, because those people tend to make the best employees. They're the most passionate. They're the ones that are going to provide the most value. And what a lot of people respond to in that interview question is they, I like music, I like reading, I like, eating and cooking. Like, well, everyone does, right? But, maybe I like, if it's like I like cooking, or I like cooking, and here's an example of a recipe I was recently trying, and I want to try this new dish. If it's, I like baking, I'm trying to bake sourdough bread, which is a more complicated process, and I had to learn that from YouTube or something. So just try to show that you really, really like to continue to learn, because even after your PhD and a postdoc, the learning never stops, and you will set yourself apart from 95% of the candidates if you just have that kind of appeal. So that's my big advice right now.
That's great. Yeah, Anne, please. Yeah.
I'd love to build on what Greg was starting with. While I'm not at Genentech anymore, I am a big fan of their many programs, especially there's such a value over there at Genentech for PhD graduates, which is our group here today. And, when times are good, you will have your definitely pick. So this is really in response to this question of sort of a downturn in the environment. I'd suggest being really open to rotational programs, being open to co-op programs, being open to other types of maybe shorter term training programs. And maybe even some ways don't worry too much about what that exact job is. Of course, you'll want to be interested. Of course, you'll want to find a team and a manager who will care about you genuinely. And that said, once you are given an offer and step into a really high quality company, like a Medtronic, like a PerkinElmer, or like a Genentech, Amgen, and others. It's really your experience there, and also really your access to all of the people. And I'm hoping that all the other companies are very similar to what I experienced at Genentech, which is that there will be a lot of people who will care deeply about helping you grow and learn and open doors for you. So that's just something you might want to think about. The other thing I know about Genentech, at least about a year ago, is they were very open to folks, of course, out of PhD programs, but also 1 or 2 years into their, let's say you had a job, it didn't go well, like you face a layoff or something, they'd still consider that pretty much entry in early career. So there was a lot of, I think, a lot of generosity in terms of, yes, come over and participate in our 1 or 2 year rotational program, and you get to work in 3 or 4 different labs, and then we'll help you find a place and a path, if not here, but definitely elsewhere. So keep that in mind.
And maybe to build on that too, there's kind of a pathway that people don't think about, but a lot of the bigger companies actually use contract companies to fill their entry-level positions initially. And so you would be an employee for, say, Pro Unlimited, which actually Amgen and Genentech have both used at different times. And you'll be signing contracts for, like, say, 18 months. And that actually gives you the opportunity to see what it's like at different companies. It gives the company a chance to see what you're like. And that's another pathway to a permanent position that's flexible and works really well. So don't rule that out or kind of, look down on it. It's a very good way to get your foot in the door also.
Great advice. Yeah.
The other thing is also when you're working for a very large company, they have many, many subsidiaries. So, PerkinElmer owns a whole slew of smaller companies. So just if a company's laying off people, doesn't mean they're not hiring at one of the others. There's a legal ramifications there, but a lot of the time, if you've got something very cutting edge, if you've been doing a PhD and you graduate from a very high quality lab, and you're working on something like gene editing, for example, base editing, whatever, we've got companies that want those people, even though we're laying people off in other sections that may be involved in, manufacturing. So it doesn't mean just because the company is laying off, it's not also hiring at the same time.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I was going to maybe stay with you, Kevin, if you're okay. Our next question is about publication. I noticed that you had a lot of chances to publish while you were at PerkinElmer. So the question is, do industry positions have general publication requirements from new PhDs? Does it vary significantly between companies? So when you are interviewing a PhD, fresh PhD, what sort of track record are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things when people come in a lot of the time from academia, it depends who they're interviewed by. If you're being interviewed by a manager that's more in the commercial sector, that's interested in sales, interested in marketing, business side, if you open up by saying, I want to get publications, that's going to switch them off. But if you're being interviewed by an R&D scientist and you've got a good publication record, especially if you're fortunate enough to be in a great lab and you've got some high impact publications, then they're going to want to snap you up because they know, that you've got a good publication record, that you know how to write papers, etc. And that's important because as Linda was saying, sometimes you can't patent a methodology, for example, but you can publish on it and it gives you some level of protection by doing that. The other thing is you want to be able to, if you're in the R&D section, you're the best friend of the marketing section because you want to promote your technology, your instrumentation, your reagent portfolio. So the more you can stick into a publication and then promote it to your key audience. For example, Thermo Fisher, they sell a huge number of different, reagents and gadgets to academia. Now, if you can put that all in a paper and show how you did the whole portfolio of your reagents and your instrumentation and promote that, it's a fine art to be able to do this. And this is why I've been very fortunate. I will go to our senior managers and I will say, we've just launched this new product. I can generate data with this academic team. And that way you can also then help fund an academic team. So yeah, if I'm interviewing somebody that's coming in, I will want to make sure that they're bringing something to the table, something that a core competency, but also they do know how to promote that technology through a publication.
And the other thing is the writing skills, whether it's for a publication or an industry. If you're writing a file, you're writing a report for somebody else, you're transferring a method to another site. The ability to communicate in writing clearly is an absolutely essential skill. So that's another thing where if you're coming and you've got publications, it helps people know that. And I totally agree with Kevin. It depends on what part of the company you're in. Another thing is actually if you have publications that the regulators can quote, that will often help your credibility with them for the whole company as well. I think different companies have different cultures. And so that's another thing to look into when you're interviewing. If you're someone like Kevin or I who really likes to publish, you would want to know that you're joining a company where that's encouraged. Some of the traditional pharma companies maybe don't encourage that as much as some of the others, but that I think that's, that's if you don't like to write, you can find places for avoiding publications, but you can't avoid writing, communicating that way, right? Regardless of what your job is.
Thank you. That was phenomenal. We want to thank Michael Melody for the question. Sorry, I didn't say your name out loud, Michael. We've just for the panelists, FYI, we've had a nice flood of questions coming in. So keep it coming. We will get to them. And if we run out of time tonight, we'll take them on in writing and get those to the audience. So just appreciate everybody's enthusiasm. Renee Napoliello, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that last name, asks, in industry, how much latitude do scientists have in their research? In the company leadership, who sets the directives? And I think I'm going to direct this one to Anne, who pointed out that she started in a kind of a smaller startup at Advanced Tissue Sciences and then spent time at Genentech. And, I'd like to hear, you've seen a nice variety of having choice and then not having choice.
Definitely. So in many ways, it depends on the life cycle of the company, where it is, whether it's starting off or, in sort of multiple decades of success or not. Maybe I'll just use, I want to make sure I mention Altos too, my current company, as well as a bit of Genentech, because I do think that's a one that people do look to in terms of the latitude. Maybe it's a bias of mine. Personally, I think some of the most successful or strongest companies who really are aiming for innovative work, innovative therapies, will encourage latitude in their scientists. And it's a trade-off, and Linda had brought it up, right? There are certainly research directives, because at the end of the day, even the most abundantly funded company, whether big or small, has to prioritize, right? Has to decide, what are the few things we can do in any given year. And so there will be a number of labs, I think, that will be either strive for or demonstrate the interest to progress the portfolio. And so often the healthy tension we often talk about is in a research, especially in industry, how much time do we spend on truth seeking versus progression seeking, right? And it doesn't have to be completely a mutual trade-off, but at points you can really dive deeply and you don't have to worry too much about throughput and moving things forward. But at some point, we all, especially I'd say bioengineers, really do care about making an impact, making a therapy or product that really, again, makes a difference in someone's life. And so you do have to show some kind of progress and make some decisions forward. At Genentech, there was a pretty nice balance, depending on what kind of lab you're in and what role, scientifically or technically, one was in. Sometimes someone's portfolio might be much more project and progression focused. There are a few that are pretty basic science. At Altos, the reason why this is quite an experiment is that currently 2/3 of our colleagues are from academia, have never been in industry. And so one of the ways that we were able to invite people into this new experiment was to actually write down academic freedom as one of the promises that would be given. Now, there is still a balance, right? There's academic freedom and we could be just a research institute forever. That said, we actually are balanced with a mission. And so I'll have to come back in a year to let you know how that went. But this is probably the first time I've really seen people really lean into, there's a lot of space promised for really self-directed, self-initiated science rather. And it'll be interesting to see how our, for example, biological scientists collaborate with our computational scientists and move some of these deep questions forward. I would predict in the next year or two, we really probably do want to converge on what are the top questions in the companies that we want to do. And that might help, give more freedom to others, like latitude, as the question is. But I do think that this will be a, ever present, I think, a healthy tension, right? Of complete freedom. You could say freedom and responsibility, right? Responsibility to our patients, who could benefit from our work, and also freedom to really explore as true scientists.
A quick question there. So are there opportunities for postdoc experiences? I did my postdoc at Scripps Research Institute and right after my grad. And that was a pretty translational institution at the time. I guess it sort of still is. But what can you say about those types of opportunities, especially right now where maybe those look pretty good compared to industry, which might be a little tight?
Interesting. You mean at Altos or?
Altos and others,
or
like
elsewhere?
the Gladstone, or
Oh yeah.
do you think that's a good stepping stone, I guess?
I think there's a number of, people, that was one of the first really great questions was about postdoc. And I think one could debate quite a bit about pros and cons of doing a postdoc. At Altos, philosophically, our scientific leaders decided not to do postdocs, but to rather call our postdoc equivalent scientists and make the positions full-time. So we don't have short-term, time limited term, which is fascinating because, again, I came from Genentech, which I believe had a very successful and still has a very successful postdoc program. It's just philosophically very different. There's something quite liberating, though, about being recognized for one's being a professional scientist and not being in training for so long. So that was and compensation also corresponds too. So it's interesting. Happy to have a side debate, but it was a choice made at Altos.
Yeah, great question, Scott. I was going to go off script a little bit because as you were talking, Anne, Song actually reached out and said, hey, could the panel comment on differences for PhD students in terms of large companies and startups? And we get this a lot. And Kevin, I don't want to put you back on the spot, but
No, absolutely.
you joined a tiny entity, right? And then that then got swallowed up a couple of times. So you've seen that all progress.
Yeah,
Could you say a few words about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so when I joined Xenogen, the VCs in the company were throwing money at us. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was like living lives of the rich and famous. We were actually encouraged to fly all over the world, first class. To get off a plane, we would, go to, when we're in Munich, see if we can get on the Autobahn and see which the fastest Porsche we could get. So it was ridiculous. It was absolutely nuts. And so that was, obviously the heyday of the boom. And so it was the downside to that is the people that started the company were all academics, very nice people, but they had no idea how to manage a company. So we blew through $50 million like nobody's business, lost control of the company. Then the VCs came in, sold us off to basically to Caliper, and 90% of the workforce got fired. I was very fortunate that I kept my job. So one of the things I would say, the most fun I've ever had was obviously in the startup company with Xenogen. I had a whale of a time. I got paid very well. I had huge flexibility. Any idea I could possibly think of, the company would let me do. I had a huge team working for me doing R&D. So I had a great time. When Caliper came in, it was much more realistic. It was a 500-person company, and they understood that we needed R&D, but they also understood we needed to sell products. Otherwise, we couldn't do R&D. So they had a healthy balance between allowing us to do R&D and making sure that it was always this, so what? If you did some R&D, you had to make it sell. So that was probably the most sensible company to work for. Then when I was acquired by PerkinElmer, not to speak badly of my current employer, but it's very, very stable. The company is incredibly stable. But if they want to do some really sexy R&D, they acquire a company. I was on a call this morning to one of our companies called Horizon Diagnostics, which is in Cambridge in the UK, and they're doing state-of-the-art gene editing, and it's fantastic. We also acquired a company called Sirion, which is a gene therapy company, and then they match those two together. So they make the gene editing technologies, put it into an AAV or a lentivirus, and then they use it for transformation. And that's when they give it to me, and I can use those tools in animal modeling. So we all join together. But to actually do any R&D in the mothership, PerkinElmer, is very hard. So you have to be one of these, as I said, like little subsidiaries. So I would say, quite honestly, my happiest times are probably in the small to mid-sized companies rather than the large companies. But saying that, the larger companies tend to have more stability, quite honestly, because they can, you know, run over the bumps, you know, level everything out. So I think it depends what you want. If you've got a family, you're paying a mortgage, you might want to look at a big company like Thermo Fisher. But if you're you want to have some real fun and do some cutting edge science, then perhaps a smaller company may be better. Something like, you know, Altos, even though it's still 500 people, I bet it's great fun working for them.
So I kind of saw both during the time I was at Amgen, because when I joined, we didn't have a product yet and there was less than 200 people, right? So, and we didn't have a lot of venture capital money left. So I actually took the job knowing that at the end of the next year, depending on if EPO got licensed or not, I would still have a job or I wouldn't, right? So there was no security there, but you got stock and things like that, which made it more fun. And we didn't have kids yet, right? It was interesting to watch Amgen transition. And I kind of think that mid-size was actually maybe the most fun, because there was still a lot of new things being done, but there was more job security, and that you weren't going to probably get laid off. And if you did, they would at least give you a package so you had time to look for a job. And I do think once companies get to be a certain size, it seems like parts of them will do research. I think Genentech and Amgen have both done a really good job of keeping some of the basic science, but it really depends on what part of the organization you're in, what the priorities are, what group you're in. Like Ann mentioned, sometimes there's specific groups that are designated to do more of the exploratory science and others that aren't. You have a lot more options for a job path though in the bigger companies, right? Because you can move to the different subsidiaries, or you can move to different departments. You can see if you like medical writing, you know, and so I think in terms of flexibility and finding out what you like, the bigger companies have that too. And people often don't mention that part.
I would say for a big company, because I've hired people that come from startups, and yeah, you definitely have more fun because, you know, they're taking the most risk. They're just like, I have to figure out a revenue stream. I have to figure it out, right? The big company, their goal is to mitigate risk, and so they already have a revenue stream. They already have a market, and they're gonna, you know, they'll take some bets, but not as much. But the nice thing is that, you know, that if you're at a big company and they're going to invest in something, they're going to do it. And so you're going to work really hard on a product, and it's going to be in somebody's hands, and you're going to see that. I've heard so many stories of people at small companies, and they do this thing where they do the field of dreams. Like, if we build it, people will just buy it because it's so good. And then they build a ton of these things and they never go anywhere. And then you're like, oh man, I worked so hard on that. And then no one bought it. So it depends on where you derive your joy from. If you derive joy from seeing people use what you've created and helping people in that sense, then I would say there's, you know, more stability, like Kevin was mentioning, at a large company for doing that.
That's a great point, Greg. Thank you. Yeah, I was going to reach out to Steve for a couple of questions to bundle into one. And you've had so many trainees come through your lab, Steve, that have gone into industry or academia. We get a couple of really typical questions. This one from Inakshi Roy. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. How do you structure your resume to get into industry? What are the main things recruiters look for? And then there's another question a little bit further down about internship experience to be able to get a job in industry. And so just maybe we'll start with you. Do you have different advice for trainees if they indicate, hey, in a year or two, I'm actually looking to join a Boston Scientific, Thermo Fisher, Altos? You know, what do you think?
The short answer is no, I don't. Generally speaking, I'm always asking my trainees to start, you know, thinking about what their career options are. It's pretty surprising how many of them don't really know what they want to do, at least when they initially start, particularly as a PhD student. I think you generally are trying to emphasize that they do as high a quality science as they can. And then when they're finishing, you know, there's multiple paths. I think if you're interested in the academic path, I think a postdoc in the private sector is less traditional and probably riskier. Most of our hires that I've seen over many years, at least in the universities, do not postdoc in the private sector. I would say if you postdoc in an academic lab, it's probably you're keeping more options open. You probably still can do academics, but probably more easily go into private sector as well. That's probably something to think about. And I think the other panelists might have some thoughts about that as well. But I also, one sort of final thought on that, I tell people, you know, there's good academic jobs, there's bad academic jobs, there's good postdocs, there's bad postdocs, you know, so sometimes if you're really confused, you might take your best and most exciting offer and it may surprise you that maybe it's a private sector postdoc and you hadn't really thought about it. Maybe it's a postdoc in Europe that you didn't even know existed, but it's really exciting and you're not necessarily, you know, committing to doing academics by any means. You're just expanding your skill set.
Yeah, great answer. Anyone else want to weigh in on, you know, tilting your experience on paper, at least towards industry? You know, I don't know if anyone has taken a crack at that. Linda, go right ahead.
So I think if you can do an internship or like, you know, there's industrial internships that are made for graduate students, you have to, you know, usually it has to be something that the professor's okay with. Maybe you're learning a skill that you can bring back to your thesis work or something like that. But that's beneficial for both parties and it's an opportunity to pick up some experience. So when you apply for a job, you have that. I think that can be really helpful.
I
Yeah,
think
great.
one of the other things when you're interviewing, if you get the chance to interview at a company, don't give a boring presentation. You know, the thing is, you got to be pretty charismatic. Everybody likes to be entertained. There's one thing about me, I've always been an entertainer. I go out there and tell little stories and people love that. You tell them the science, but you tell them the stories too at the same time and make them laugh. And people like that. If you just go there and you're very dry, they don't want it. And the other thing my old boss used to say, and it's really funny, he used to say, you got nothing to say it in color. And the reason behind that was basically he would give the best presentations ever, but 99% of it wasn't his data. He would just show parts of his data embedded within other stories and have lots of movies and stuff. And it's the wow factor that sells. So you've got to be a showman, because if you're working for a company, you've got to sell products. So if you're an R&D scientist and you can go out in the world and you can promote those products by entertaining people, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it absolutely works. That's why at PerkinElmer, in the section I'm in, a lot of what we do is we do animal modeling and we do 3D movies and we use a lot of color and a lot of impact. And you show that to people, and I always say this, 30% of your brain is dedicated to visual imagery. You captivate an audience. And if you can do that, people remember what you've talked about, and they will want to buy your product more than everybody else's. And exactly the same when you're being interviewed. If they can see that you can present that way, they're more likely to hire you than somebody showing some boring set of slides where there's a lot of verbiage there.
And one very basic thing is, if you're interviewing, make sure that you know what the company does and what the position is for. I've actually interviewed people who came in and clearly were looking for any job and had done zero research on the company. You know, so like you're not ever going to hire somebody who's not taken at least a minimum amount of time to educate themselves.
Yeah, good advice. Hey, Ann, Shanae Butler reaches out and asks, would participating in business certificate programs help you reach higher level management positions in the absence of an opportunity to do an MBA? You know, these programs are really proliferated over the last few years. Can you speak to that a little bit with an MBA like you have?
Sure, happy to. It's like a scarlet.
It's a scarlet letter. Yeah.
By the way, I know I shouldn't say it here, but my husband, who is a bioengineer, also reminds me that I have a master's in busyness. So I always thought that was funny. I did learn a lot. I really did learn a lot with MBA, and I think that there are certain situations and conditions which at MBA can be beneficial. But that said, I actually think that the information and the the knowledge that one learns in an MBA is mostly commoditized these days. You can definitely actually just Google it and learn from a certain, whether it's certification programs or not. I think what I find is useful is really paying attention to the intersection of, I don't know if it's business, but aspects that are not science, but crucially important to science. I think that, Kevin had actually talked about some of it, which is, and also Linda and others, which is, first of all, effective communication, right? Being able to capture people's attention, being able to be persuasive, being able to be, hold one's own in a very healthy intellectual debate. Those are really fabulous skills. I also think this idea of decision-making, I'm a huge fan of, not overly like decision analysis per se, but this idea of we have so many choices to make as scientists, as engineers, and as, people who lead or build companies. How do you know which strategy is right? Where should you invest next, right? Where are you going to put your precious resources, whether it's graduate students, whether it's, skills or, other types of funding. So those kind of skills, I think, can be quite important. So please don't tell Stanford, but I'm not sure if most people need an MBA to lead or make decisions, but I do think this idea of paying attention to risk, paying attention to what is valuable to you and the company, and also what choices you're going to make under finite time and finite, funding, could make or break a group, a company, and it does matter. And I think several people mentioned that startups can, there are externalities, there are things that are random, but there are things within your control, and if you can tell the difference, those are powerful skills.
Yeah, actually, my wife always berates me because when I joined Xenogen, the first thing they wanted me to, first they said to me they needed a chief medical officer. Would I be willing to go back and do an MD? And then they wanted me to take an MBA, and I just had enough of education at that stage and just wanted to do R&D. And so I didn't. And my wife often reminds me, if you'd taken that MBA or got that high, other qualification, you probably would be a senior vice president now, so I don't know, but I'm happy where I am. So what the hell?
Yes. Steve feels your pain with the MD PhD. Speaking of lots of education, Greg, we'll put you on the spot a little bit here. We've got a few questions coming in about postdoctoral experience and how that impacts, both kind of stepping into an industry role and then, long term throughout your career. How much do you think a postdoctoral experience helps you in an industry career?
I mean, I think it's really great to have. I think when you look at the education system as a whole, like you look at the bachelor's degree, from bachelor's to a master's, PhD, and from that to a postdoc, for a bachelor's degree, you go to class, you're being carefully guided with the curricula. There's the guardrails are on. You get a PhD and the guardrails begin to come off. It's more, you still have your mentor who's there working with you and helping you ask the right questions and do the experiments. And then a postdoc is you lose even more of that, right? And now you're supposed to be able to do a lot of that on your own, slightly less mentorship. I mean, at least the good postdocs, right? And then you move into industry and you move, or you become a principal investigator in academia, and really you should be independent. You should be able to do a lot of these things. Now there will still be people to help you. You'll find mentorship, but I think it's part of that process. I think that becomes the most valuable thing you can demonstrate and prepare yourself for. Like the way I treat it is, and I didn't do this early on enough, I think, but it's like, if I were to start a company, what would I do? How would I do this? How am I going to make money? How am I going to, but like they really, it's kind of weird to think like that, but it's not, that's kind of the Bay Area, Stanford think frame. It's just like, just go do it. Just try it, figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And a postdoc is the beginning of that. It starts to help you do that. You're writing grants and starting to conduct more independent research.
Fantastic. Yeah. Hope that was a helpful answer. Anyone can take the next question. It's, do you look for applicants who have the same research background as the ongoing research in the company? And I think that's getting at outside of the box thinkers who maybe didn't train in your area that you're directly focused on, but they have some skills that really you see a connection for. I don't know if anybody has a great example of that, where they've hired a non-traditional candidate for a role, and it's really panned out. So, or do you stick with the do you stick with the tried and true? Maybe Kevin, you want to take that?
Yeah,
one?
well, it depends what you're hiring for. For example, I started off heading up R&D in or infectious disease R&D, and then I went into what was called technical applications. We needed people to speak the science out in a forum to our customers. And so it's sales orientated, but the way we would do it, you would have a business representative and you'd have a scientist. And the reason you do that is you don't want to bastardize the situation. If you're a scientist and you're trying to sell something, no one's going to take you seriously. They're going to say that's a sleazy sales guy. But if you separate it and you have a sales guy and a scientist, then people take it seriously. They say, oh, that's the scientist, that's the business guy, and the two will never meet. So when you're hiring people, you may be hiring a postdoc, and we did this all the time. We hire postdocs in key areas. We would do more disease areas. So we would have somebody who was from a key lab, for example, down at Stanford, who was an oncologist, a cancer scientist, or somebody in inflammatory disease, stem cell research, whatever, and would have a team of experts. And then we would put them out in the field with the sales guy. And so it depends what you want to do. And the reason I'm saying that is because, we're talking in this forum about having somebody working at the bench doing R&D. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case. When I hired people, they were bench scientists, but they came in and they went out straight away into the field presenting the technology. And the reason that was actually more appealing in some ways, it's much more lucrative because you end up getting bonuses, commission plans, etc. And you can earn almost double what you would earn if you're working on the bench. If you associate yourself with the revenue stream, you're much more valuable to the company. You're a lot less likely to get fired when push comes to shove, when they're closing down an R&D program. So that's also something to think about, how you can leverage your position.
Yeah, I like that. Linda, go ahead.
So I think I was thinking, and some of the most successful folks that I hired had a very maybe different career path or more diverse. And also, I mean, it's a, I don't think you can't overstate how often the most successful teams are the most diverse teams. People who have a diversity of experience, life experience, backgrounds, ways of thinking of problems. If you put them together, those teams are always way better than people who are all the same. And I think that includes people who followed the same, career course, the same education course. And often someone who's interested in something a little bit different, there'll be overlaps there that you didn't see. Or a lot of times, actually, you'll realize that the solution to the problem is not, even though it seems like it's a protein engineering problem, it comes from someone who's really good at AI or something like that. And so I would say if there's jobs that you're interested in, it doesn't have to be what you did your research on, as long as you know why you're interested in it. And maybe when you're applying, capture that in the first couple sentences of your resume. This is what I think I can bring to this position. This is why I'm interested in this position. And you might trigger good things. We had a woman who was one of my postdocs at Amgen who had a very non-traditional career path. After she got her Ph.D., she actually went to South Africa and helped them establish an AIDS Molecular Biology Institute. When she was working with us, she went on to kind of come up with model systems that would let us test attributes of molecules and see if they were immunogenic or not, which was, kind of basic research, right? She now runs the group at Amgen that does biological consequence assessment, and that was because she had way different ways of approaching problem solving.
Wow. Great answers. Yeah. Steve, I think you've gotten a tailor-made question here. Someone asks anonymously, please, could you share some insight on what the journey would be like if you do an industry postdoc and want to come back to academia as a full-time faculty? And, maybe we can open this to Scott and Sung as well. Just, you guys hire academic, rising stars. How many of those people do come in with a postdoc experience in industry? And can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. Well, I mean, almost zero.
Yeah.
It's very rare. It certainly has happened. It's just very rare. And that may be a self-selection phenomenon. Most people that seek out a postdoc in the private sector are more interested in that. I would say you're going to probably want to demonstrate that you've had, you know, the ability to publish your work. I mean, Linda already mentioned that as well. This is not difficult to do in the private sector, but I think if you're there, you want to search for opportunities or windows where you can do that. If you haven't published any of your work for 5 years or so, you're just up against so many people that are in academic postdocs where that's essentially what they're trying to do, and that's what you do as an academic. So it just makes it very difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. I don't know, Song, you have a different experience, or Scott?
The only corollary to that is folks like Don Chigazola, who have years and years experience in Medtronic, R&D and marketing, and then come and teach these skills to undergraduate and masters, and sometimes even graduate students. Because I think you don't have to rule out academics as a career. If of course it would help if you published, some of your work, but really, I think just because now bioengineering is becoming more mainstream, that is compared to electrical engineering, mechanical engineering in the past, bioengineers now have a little imprimatur of what they can do. You could guide your trajectory so that you can come back and work in academics in a lot of different ways. There's so many MS programs. We're developing one ourselves, and yeah, I think there is a opportunity to do that. The other thing I was to just comment on is, the thing about bioengineering and the thing about the way we structure our education. And there was a couple of questions about, I'm a bioengineer and I'm trying to struggle getting a position, and there's a spectrum, software engineering, electrical. But I think we have to keep our minds open when we're out there looking for jobs, because we have a lot of skill sets. We're designed to solve problems and use established engineering principles. But I think we have to be pretty flexible when we're out there in the job search. I think that would be a good advice. I don't know if anybody else would.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Song, do you have any experience with students who've come in, or faculty members who've come in with some industry postdoc experience?
Postdoc, not many, because for postdoc, I think there are some training specifically in academic environment regarding research, finding the frontier of the research directions, and also even get extramural funding, publishing top-notch papers. So in industry, if you can achieve that, I think it should be fine. In general, if you evaluate the applicants from industry and academia, in general, the academia applicants will have some advantage because the always environment in mentor, etc. But it is also possible. But I do know some of the people who have been in industry for a long time, or research institutions, and come back to university, especially a lot of famous researchers in the soft electronics area. I can also show a path to there's some trajectory you could get back to academia. For postdoc, we haven't seen any, but it's possible.
Okay, that's great. Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, one thing that when I was a postdoc, I thought of going into industry, and I thought that was me being a sellout. If I was going to go and join the dark side, it was just because I was going to earn more money. That at the end of my career, I'd never do anything, of any use to anybody ever again. I would just sell products, for example. But, very quickly, what you learn is that, industry wants credibility. They get credibility through academia. And the reason I'm saying that is you can publish a top-end paper and have all your co-authors from your company, and it's not given the same credence as if you've got somebody like Stanford, UCLA, one of the academic, hubs involved in it, because people think it's more honest. You're not just trying to, it's not like an N of 1 when you publish something, the data that you've got in the paper. So it gives it more credibility. And the commercial sector knows this. It knows it needs academia to give it credibility. So what I've done in my own career is I've preached this to upper management who don't really understand this to begin with. And then once you show them the impact, the fact that you can then write white papers with, renowned scientists, you can start publishing with Nobel laureates. I mean, most of what it comes down to is if you can provide, tell your company that, yes, they should have their instrumentation in this paper. So therefore, give a little bit to get a little bit. And so what we do often is we'll help an academic team get access to our technology very cost effectively. We'll provide reagents, even sometimes platforms, demo units, or even give them units to get their publication. So I don't think if you're looking for a job in the commercial sector, don't feel like you're going to be a sellout, because quite honestly, sometimes you look at the academics and you say, well, they published some really nice work, but it never came to anything. It never came to fruition because nobody was willing to commercialize it, because they weren't willing to go to the dark side. So I think there's a yin and yang there. You've got to do both. And if you can mesh them together, then you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, well put.
I
Go
would
ahead,
just say
Linda.
there's different cultures in different companies too, right? So Kevin's experience and my experience and Ann's experience and then Greg's are going to be quite different, because we come from very different parts of the commercial space. And that's an important thing to remember when you're looking for a job too, right? There's different models, different ways of working. If you are thinking of an industry postdoc, the best industry postdocs have as a requirement that the project is basic research. The postdoc will be allowed to present. A lot of times it's even written into the contract, so many conferences, and you'll be allowed to publish. So like at Amgen, when all of our scientists would apply for postdocs, we would pick the project that was really basic research, but still impacting the company. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. But I understand if the academic world doesn't understand that. But like the woman I gave the example for, in her 3 years postdocing at Amgen, she published 4 papers in Journal of Biological Chemistry, which is, if you were doing a postdoc in a biochemistry department in academia, that would also be considered good. So,
yeah,
be discerning in what you're doing.
Yeah, watch out for yourself. That's great. Be an advocate. Two quick bookkeeping things I want to take care of before we hit the end of time and everybody settle down. I think many of our panelists are happy to go a little bit beyond, but in case you do have to leave, I wanted to share very quickly just a little bit of an advertisement for an upcoming event. Hold on one second while I get my screen in order. We want to point out that the next California Academy Distinguished Speaker is Professor Tejal Desai, who's now the Dean at Brown University College of Engineering. You may remember that Dr. Desai was chair at UCSF, I believe, recently. So quite a catch, Scott, for you and the Academy. And she's going to present some work on March the 6th from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. So I wanted to make sure to point that out to everybody. And then
I think she'll give us a unique, insight into, how she was an MD Ph.D. bioengineer and how she went, became a chair at UCSF, but now a dean, which is pretty remarkable. There's very few, women deans out there, and she's at a great place. So I think it'll be a really nice perspective.
Speaking of career moves, we were also lucky to have Dr. Abraham Lee weigh in on the Q&A in case you missed it. Thanks, Abe, from UC Irvine. Dr. Lee points out that national labs produce postdocs that frequently come back to industry more readily. We haven't talked about national labs tonight, but that's another great opportunity. Dr. Lee was at Lawrence Livermore, if memory serves, and did a lot of great work up there. So don't forget about those opportunities. It's another class of postdoctoral work that might be really helpful for both academic and industry opportunities. So, okay, we'll take a few more questions and then be respectful to the panel. Let me stop sharing my screen there. Sorry. Greg, there was one that came in that really struck me, and I think that Scott pointed it out a second ago. Let me just read it. It's an anonymous question. As a bioengineer, I'm struggling to find positions in industry. I'm on a spectrum of software engineer or electrical engineer all the way to cellular biology. I feel very much in the middle, yet jobs are much more on the edges of that spectrum, and I lack the skills. I'm not sure how to approach that. And I think Scott wisely said, hey, sometimes our first job isn't our final job, right? We be flexible about what we take. But I noticed that your path is pretty similar, right? It's on kind of kind of you worked in a couple of those areas. You got any advice for that question?
Yes, I do. I mean, look at where our systems are going. For those of you who used to do Western blots the old school way of doing Western blots, it's very different than how Western blots are done today. I mean, look at Protein Simple, that company, and how you can actually look at proteins in small capillaries, totally different. The point is they're becoming more integrated. They're not these individual steps where you need, an expert on each individual step, and someone has to build that integrated box. And definitely a mechanical engineer is not going to understand maybe, how to make the gels, right? Because that's not their background. And an electrical engineer is not going to want to have to learn about the molecular biology of an imaging system. So I think that is where biomedical engineers are the strongest, is we've already shown that we're willing to learn the material. I mean, you learn a little bit of it of each of everything, but that's nothing stopping you from digging deeper into any of the parts that may be required for that project that would be, you'd be working on. So that's how I'd approach it. And you have to look for those jobs, and they're not going to be called biomedical engineers or engineering positions when you do a job search. They're called system integration. So don't, it's something, there's not even engineer in the title. I know it's the worst. I'm so sorry. That's just how our recruiters do it. Search system integration. You'll find your home.
Thanks a lot, Greg. I don't know if anybody else has other thoughts on that one, but it was a good question. So let's see. I've got another anonymous question that comes in. I'm doing stem cell differentiation research. When I searched for jobs, I could find most of the jobs in pharmaceutical research, but not much in my field, right, in stem cell differentiation. So there's a gap between my research and most of the companies where I'd like to apply. What do you do when you can't find your niche in job descriptions? I think this is a really common question. And anyone can take this one. Kevin, you go.
I think you can educate people. I mean, the thing is, most of the time you're being interviewed by a combination of perhaps, a director of R&D, but then you'll also have other managers in the meeting that are going to be from other sectors. And they, as I think Linda was saying, you need to complement a group. So you want to bring something novel in. So, stem cell research, you've got to get to that point. You've got to do all the molecular biology. You've got other components. And sometimes, give you an example here, I was asked to find a company. We do mostly preclinical imaging. So it's, animal modeling. And I've always hated doing animal modeling. I mean, I shouldn't say this because this has been my career, but if you can avoid using animals in research, why wouldn't you? So I loved, working with Scott, because he's doing, bioengineering. People are talking about looking at spheroids, organoids, organ on a chip. And so I actually tried to get my company to acquire Emulate, and this is not confidential or anything, but that's what we were trying to do. So I was asked to find a company. It ended up being, too difficult to acquire that company, but I love their technology and other companies that are doing this type of work. And I think, and the reason I'm saying this is because if you came into my company or a company that's doing preclinical, everybody hates preclinical, it's a necessary evil, but you come in and you say, hey, I've got experience in doing stem cell research and organ on a chip, and I may be able to take this model and make it more predictive than if you were doing an animal model. All of a sudden, people's eyes light up and go, wow, why didn't we think of that? And it may sound, you may think, oh, this is dumb, everybody knows this, but you've got to realize companies don't. They have their core competencies and they have a way, it's a turnkey way of doing something. If you come in and you educate them to how to do their job better or how to make more money out of it and make it more cost effective, then they're going to hire you. And that's what it comes down to. So just be inventive.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Kevin. And it actually goes into a next question that maybe I'll ask Ann to tackle. Edward asks quite a couple of different questions. I thought the interesting part of his question was most times as a PhD student, I can only meet 50% of the job requirement that's listed on a job description. How can I ever, his words were break through into industry? Can you help people with that where they're not a perfect match? I find I get a lot of questions like this from students, and I feel like there's a little confidence issue there, right, with applying. So
definitely. So on the glass half full side is that you meet 50% of the requirements. I mean, that's pretty good. So, I mean, what I would do, and I think a few people probably mentioned it here, you know, it would be great if you could, you know, sort of connect the dots for your interviewer or whomever the hiring manager is and really help them, you know, kind of in an educational moment, see the benefits of what you really bring. I mean, if you can really, you know, connect the dots of they have some problems to solve and you're there to solve it, I think that's great. I know someone had mentioned quite early on that maybe it was Greg, is demonstrating that you're a fabulous learner too. So those are the types of folks I really do. It's actually quite rare that you find anyone at any level who meets 100% of the job requirements. I don't know, maybe all of you, the panelists, are much more successful than I am, but it never is a full match, right? And so, you know, usually I'm trying to prioritize, okay, out of all these qualifications I'm looking for, which few matter the most? And I think that's the match you're looking for. And also, if you can demonstrate that you are a self-starter and can learn, and also I think was probably brought up, really engaged team member, really could come in and be part of that diverse team that Linda is talking about, your unique background. So I see here international student from China, probably different types of skills that you've learned along the way, you know, different countries and different labs. If you could really kind of demonstrate, you know, a sort of portfolio of skills, which is you meet some requirements, you're a great learner, and you bring a certain type of cognitive or other type of experiential diversity, you're a great candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck, Edward. Good luck. Yeah.
And the teamwork, I think, you know, a couple of us had mentioned that, but any experience you have that shows that you do like teamwork, to me, that's one of maybe the biggest differences between industry and academia in a way, is that all work in industry is teamwork, right? You have to be able to work with teams. And for those of us who like that, that's actually one of the real pluses, is that you're engaging with the team and you're trying to get something to market, right? So the selling that part of that's what you like, I think, is really important.
Yeah. People will really pay attention to that. Thank you, Linda.
Yeah. I think we'll take a couple more questions. I wanted to let everybody know that I kind of just put my email address in the chat. So if we finish the evening tonight without answering your burning question, I'd really appreciate if you just throw that in an email to myself, and I can actually connect you with any of the panelists who you'd kind of like to ask that question to. And certainly if you'd like to have a discussion with any of us, we're all happy to help out UC students. We're mostly alum anyway, as you know. So we got a question from Ali Su that talks about this ever-present problem of, hey, I went in and studied for my PhD. I like the research, it's very exciting, but boy, these management track sort of roles where I'm managing people and projects sound very fun. But, you know, Ali laments that it's hard for me to know whether management track would be a good fit for me when I am not getting hands-on experience running large projects. Do you have advice for, you know, how to get your feet wet in something new if you've been doing a PhD for 6 years? And anyone can answer that one. Doesn't matter who takes it.
Well, one thing I'd say is you've got to know yourself as well. You know, I again, from my own experience, when I came into Xenogen and I was given a very large team, luckily they were great people, didn't take advantage of me, but very quickly I realized that I wasn't good at making hard decisions. I couldn't fire people. You know, when we had that 90% of the company had to be laid off, I had to lay my team off. It killed me. I was in tears trying to lay people off, and I'm just a wuss. I was no good at it. You have to realize that you've got to be that hard person. You've got to make the hard decisions and be able to select two people. If you've got to fire somebody, you've got to be able to fire the person, and then maybe your bestest buddy. But unfortunately, you've got to be pretty ruthless sometimes for the company. Now, some people can do that, some people can't. So, you know, I've realized that in my career, and quite honestly, even though, you know, my title is as the vice president in the company, I have nobody that reports to me anymore. I'm sort of, you know, I'm drifting around doing what I need to do, which is wonderful. But when I managed people, I was horrendous at it. This is why my wife always says to me, you should have taken that MBA, you know, then you'd have realized what you should have done. But, So know yourself, know whether or not you can make hard decisions. And if you can't, then steer clear of that.
I appreciate that. Anne, how did you know it was a good fit for you? Did you learn that at ATS?
Management?
Yeah.
I'll just pick up and I'll try to keep it brief. I think that you have to recognize, first of all, if you like people. So, really working with people, coaching people, have a genuine sort of interpersonal sort of relationships. And of course, one could do it as in the, pure scientific technical tracks and the management track. I was kind of smiling when Kevin was saying it's not easy being on management track, right? So all I can say is maybe the first step, especially from where, sort of the person who's posing the question is, first see if you love being on teams and working with groups of people, and also try mentoring first or coaching. I think that's a great first step. If that's where your interest lies and skill set lies, then you can think about management. I'm not sure if I would advise a wonderfully, very, very talented PhD students to overly think about management track yet, until you really kind of get into a team and do some work together and deliver something bigger than oneself, right? Then you can decide whether or not you want to go down, quote, the management track. By the way, at many companies, there's many blends in between, right? You can be a great manager of small groups of technical, colleagues and scientists, and I still consider that manager. I just consider manager anyone who really is asked to, have that responsibility for one or more people. And again, it's a big responsibility. So I think it's more about, is that kind of responsibility that you want? And you have to genuinely care about that person that you are working with and that team, those teams.
Great answer. I am taking a question offline. There was a later one elaborating about the differences skills and job responsibilities for product development versus R&D. I'm happy to answer that one by email or phone. So if you just email me, I'll handle that question. Maybe our final one comes from Renee again. She asks, in industry, do companies support continued training of their scientists? We all want to grow. We all want to learn, both financially and in terms of opportunity costs of time. Linda, you want to start that one off?
For most, absolutely. It's a requirement in many ways, right? And I think one of the things we haven't mentioned a lot is belonging and participating in professional societies, which is also often considered part of the job and is a way to continuously grow. What I ended up doing in the end, one of the things outside of Amgen that I ended up building a reputation in is analysis of particles, because you can't have them in drugs. I didn't even know what that was when I was starting out. I had no interest in having that become something that I was became an expert in. It was just what was needed. I educated myself in it. I found out that I felt like I had something to contribute. So your career will switch around as the opportunities come and you get interested in it. But in terms of once you're there going and getting your MBA, usually that kind of thing is actually supported more. If that fits your job role, but there's always opportunities to learn. I think, regardless of whether we're in academia or industry, we're all scientists, right? If we didn't have the ability to learn and grow, we would shrivel up. So that's like a given.
Yeah, Kevin or Anne, any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I think, every company I've been in has always encouraged me to pursue, as Linda was saying, Linda was saying, joining societies, going to meetings, getting further educated, whether that's a short course or a long-term course. I personally, as I said, I didn't want to do MBAs, etc., but so many of my colleagues ended up doing that and then have, gone much further in their career by doing that. And I applaud them by being able to do that. And if you like learning, more diverse things, and I think most companies, no matter what level they're at, will encourage that. So yeah, there's no need to think that if I go into industry, that's the end of my career, that's the end of, me being able to learn anymore. They will absolutely want to encourage you to do that.
I would just add yes to both. I mean, the companies I've been in several, and I certainly have friends in many. Most companies realize that actually is a really welcome and highly beneficial. And if anything, most of the companies I've been at, I was marveled over the resources and the opportunities. So, and I'm sure that's true at Medtronic. We should be asking you questions, Walt. I just realized this rather relatedly. Hey, how did that not happen? But
You know
I'm
what?
guessing that Medtronic really invests in their scientists too, right?
I just want to echo what you all are saying. I think you shrivel up. I think what Linda said is phenomenal. And I think many of us on the call tonight have been kind of blessed to have, bosses and mentors who really watch out for us in a way, right? And make sure that we are still getting the fertilizer, the water, the sun we need to grow, right? And just, whether that's external classes or an experience on a campus working with students, that's another great way to grow, by the way. So I've just really benefited from that over the years and appreciate it. Maybe Greg, we should let you have the last word. Any advice about this question?
Yeah, I mean, take advantage of every opportunity that the company is going to give you for continued learning. It's knowledge is power. I know the posters were always kind of corny growing up, but it really is the truth. And yeah, the resources a big company can give you to do continued education is great. They paid for $15,000 worth of Stanford classes that I took recently for this. It was called the Ignite program, where you do like this entrepreneurship academy. So I mean, like I don't want to pay that money out of pocket. So bigger companies have deeper pockets. You get to do many things, so take advantage of them and learn.
Very well put. Hey, I hope everybody can appreciate all of our panelists taking time out of their evening to speak with us tonight. And I couldn't be happier with the turnout and the outstanding questions that we got from the students in the audience. I just want to say one more time, I shared my email through chat. Anyone is welcome to give me a shout if you heard something you like and you'd like to connect further. Most of us are on LinkedIn, so take advantage of that. We'd love to see a lot of LinkedIn requests tonight. But we want to wish you all the best. And Song, maybe I'll let you close it out officially.
Wow, what wonderful panel discussions. It's great. Thank you, Walt, and all the panelists and all the participants. We still have some questions in the Q&A. I hope we could address them later. Thank you all very much. It's a record high participation day. Really a very popular session. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess inclement weather is
It can be good and bad.
Where else does anybody want to go?
Everybody stay
Thanks,
safe.
everybody, and have a great evening and a safe one.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Cheers.
thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.